On July 28, 1990, a presidential candidate named Alberto Fujimori was elected president of Peru. As a math professor born to a Japanese family, he was a political outsider with no experience before his election. By his side was Vladimiro Montesinos, a presidential advisor and lawyer with political ambition for power. In 1990, when terrorism was at its peak, during his campaign he vowed to defeat terrorist groups, though at the severe abuse of rights of those who were suspected to be terrorist involved. Fujimori was well received in Peru, although later his story would change. Although he had many supporters, conflicts arose with human rights groups, the public, and the U.S. State Department. U.S. official documents show at the time suspicion arose when military death squads were appearing in Peru.
At the time, it was hard to live in Peru because of the inflation and the abundance of terrorist attacks. The country was deep in poverty with an unstable political and economic base. 1/3 of the population was in poverty. There were two main terrorist groups, the Shining Path, El Sendero Luminoso, and the MRTA, Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement. The Shining Path and MRTA were bombing buildings, lampposts, and electricity poles. According to witnesses, going out in public was very dangerous because terrorist attacks and bombings were commonplace. 25,000 people lost their lives to terrorist attacks. There was hyperinflation, growing to 7,600%, and Peru was in economic crisis. Even before he was elected, there was corruption in Peru. As Fujimori told filmmaker Ellen Perry, the government simply did not govern. Even the U.S. Secretary of State, James Baker, said, quote, "No nation and no people face a more daunting, dangerous, or terrible set of crises than those inherited by the new democratic government in Peru." People were desperate for drastic change. Fujimori vowed to bring that change by any means. So the effect was that they were willing to take a chance on an outsider with a totally different background who swore to solve the economic, political, and terrorist crises. Fujimori was successful with the elections and campaign slogan, "Un presidente como tú," a president like you. He won with 54% of the votes against well-known author Mario Vargas Llosa, who many believed would win the election. Little did we know how far he was willing to go on the extent of his promise.
Many major changes were made during the prime of Fujimori's presidency. Many people agreed on his actions while others simply didn't. To begin, on August 8, 1990, Fujimori implemented a series of reforms that led to the Fuji-shock. He lifted some changes that kept prices low, effectively making inflation rise over to 397% in the first month. It caused many citizens to struggle financially during the seemingly endless year of the shock of the sudden inflation. During Fujimori's fight against terrorism, the MRTA kept 72 hostages in the Japanese embassy, with the demand of 500 of the members of the MRTA that have been captured to be released. The hostages were kept captive from December 17, 1996 to April 22, 1997, close to 4 months. Fujimori helped rescue the hostages. It was a very successful mission. He gained popularity as a hero for his success. The Shining Path would soon be defeated on September 12, 1992, when Abigail Guzman, their leader, was captured and jailed. Soon after his capture, the terrorist group disbanded, no longer capable to live on without the guidance of its leader. The MRTA, though terribly damaged, still managed to survive, but less active. Both the Barrios Altos massacre and the La Cantuta massacre were undoubtedly some of the worst massacres of the time. On November 3, 1991, the Barrios Altos massacre occurred that resulted in the death of 14 adults and an 8-year-old boy. Then, on July 18, 1992, the La Cantuta massacre took place that left 9 students and 1 professor dead. The La Colina death squad, the Hill, was authorized by presidential advisor Vladimiro Montesinos. According to classified documents obtained, the U.S. government highly disapproved of the stalling of the investigation of the 2 massacres. Fujimori was criticized by his advisors' involvement in the massacres. In addition to fixing the problem of terrorism, during the 1990s, Fujimori addressed the problem of poverty and overpopulation in the countryside by forcibly sterilizing hundreds of thousands of indigenous women. While some were promised food and money to never have children again, not told what had been done to them. In one extreme case, one woman died of an infection after the procedure. It was simply an unethical solution to a short-lasting problem. Although Fujimori had been fighting off terrorist groups, on April 5, 1992, he shut down Congress in order to make Peru a dictatorship, after Congress had begun to disagree with Fujimori's ideas. Even the Secretary of U.S. State, Mr. President, you cannot destroy democracy in order to save it.
Without a doubt, the short-term effects of Fuji shock was the increase in poverty and the struggle to provide basic needs. Fortunately, the effects were short-term, lasting only up to a year after Peru had begun to adjust to the inflation. Fujimori had found foreign investors to do business with Peru once more, stabilizing the economy and improving Fujimori's reputation enough to provide him with enough voters to begin his second term. Both the Barrios Altos massacre and the La Cantuta massacre were undoubtedly some of the worst massacres at the time. On November 3, 1991, the Barrios Altos massacre occurred that resulted in the death of 14 adults and an 8-year-old boy. Classified documents show silence was reused in the massacre. Then, on July 18, 1992, the La Cantuta massacre took place. They left 9 students and 1 professor dead. The La Colina death squad, The Hill, was authorized by presidential advisor Vladimir Montesinos. According to classified documents obtained, the U.S. government would highly disapprove of the stalling of the investigation of the 2 massacres. Fujimori was criticized by his advisors and involvement in the massacres. The successful rescue mission of the 72 hostages during the Japanese embassy siege gave Fujimori the title of a hero. Though it gave a positive impact on his reputation, his use of death squads made a bad impression that led to the choice that the U.S. would threaten to cut off aid to Peru, a long-lasting effect that would be troubling for Peru.
Many people, including the U.S. Ambassador Anthony Quayton, agreed that some things Fujimori had done benefited Peru, until the public had discovered the rest of the story. In the year 2000, Fujimori was re-elected for his second term because after his rewriting of the Constitution, his first term didn't count. In the same year, the Vladi videos went broadcasted by the press, displaying Montesinos bribing members of Congress. Both were accused of embezzling millions of dollars. And on November 19, 2000, Fujimori took a plane to Japan and set his registration by fax to Peru the next day. Even when conflict arose, Alberto Fujimori rarely ever compromised. On April 7, 2009, he was convicted for his involvement in the Barrios Altos and La Cantuta massacres. He was sentenced for 25 years in prison. Members of human rights organizations felt that although Fujimori got a sentence of only 25 years in prison, that he had gotten justice. Though the rejoice was shortly lived, as on Christmas Day, December 25, 2017, he was pardoned by Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, the newly elected president of Peru, and was released. There were protests in the streets of Lima, Peru. Truly, some criminals don't pay the full price of their crime.